have three main points. One is about reviewing, like how do I review? I'm at the beginning of my studying, actually. It's like almost my second month. So I would like to know, like, how should I be reviewing and how intense that should be at this point, and also like in the near future. And the second is like, I'm really focused on building a strong foundation. And for example, I'm working with sufficient and necessary assumption questions right now. And I would like to talk about those a little bit. I'm a bit confused about those. And also about scheduling, how should I create a study schedule?
Yeah, sure. Those are all important questions. They're topics I cover a lot. Happy to go into them with you. So first off, reviewing. I'll speak specifically about logical reasoning, but a lot of this applies to the other sections too. It's really about looking at where your misunderstanding stemmed from initially. Was it in the stimulus, the short paragraph at the beginning, the question stem, or the choices? And if it was the stimulus, what about the stimulus made it difficult for you? What are the different ways in which they increased the difficulty of the argument? Did they put the conclusion in the middle? Did they put filler around it? Did they use difficult conditional indicators like unless, or did they fail to include conditional indicators or evidence conclusion indicators that made it tougher for you to interpret what the stimulus was saying? Alternatively, it may be in the question stem if they used unfamiliar language there that made it harder to recognize what they were actually asking you to do, or maybe you forgot what they were asking midway through your evaluation of the choices. And if it was in the choices, what was tempting about the wrong answer that made you pick it, and what ultimately made it wrong? And what's discouraging about the right answer that pushed you away from it, and what ultimately made it correct? Because you got to figure out which specific tricks you're uniquely prone to falling for, because you're not falling for all of them, only some of them, and you have to spot them so you won't keep making those same mistakes again and again.
Yeah, I think right now, my biggest problem is with choosing the correct answer choice. Like I can eliminate the wrong answer choices quite easily, and then I'm left with 2 or 3 answer choices, and then I eliminate one thinking this can't be it, but then it turns out that's it. So yeah, that's where I'm having a problem at. And actually, specifically with the necessary assumption questions, I'm eliminating answer choices thinking this must be an answer choice for sufficient assumption question. I'm thinking this can't be a necessary assumption question, a necessary assumption answer choice, it's too strong. But then that turns out to be the correct answer choice. So
yeah, I mean, they're really good at making those correct answers unappealing. And especially for necessary assumption questions, you should gravitate towards more moderate language because that's more likely to have been required by the stimulus than more extreme language would be. But if it's so moderate, it seems in a way unexciting, like it couldn't have much impact. But that's in a way, that's what you want. You want something moderate that was required in order for the argument to work rather than having new language.
Okay, and so how do I differentiate between like if it's too strong of an answer choice or if it's like just what the necessary assumption is? Because I assume, oh, this must be like this is too strong, and then it turns out to be the right answer. Like, how do I differentiate between like that the sufficient assumption and necessary assumption?
Sure. So I'll talk in general about extreme versus moderate language. Extreme language, you could look for the degree of certainty in the conclusion or the category of things they're discussing. So extreme language would be like all, always, never, or nearly always, or virtually always, or most of the time. And then more moderate language would say things like sometimes or have qualifiers, like instead of saying all people in the world, all people who have this particular characteristic, narrowing the scope of who they're talking about.
So I have to pick an answer choice that's in the same line with the conclusion. Like, is that what you're implying, or?
Yeah, what I'm saying is that you want language that is of similar strength to the argument's language for necessary assumption.
Okay.
It cannot go beyond what the argument was suggesting.
But it cannot fall short either.
It can be more narrow for necessary assumption. If we have an argument saying all people who take the LSAT go to law school, and we narrow that to say all people who scored 150 and above go to law school, that is more moderate than the stimulus, than the initial one is, but it still includes it. The argument still includes that more specific group. Sufficient assumption, on the other hand, the language could be as extreme as you want, as long as it gets the job done of guaranteeing the conclusion. So you could even think of it as being like a more general principle a lot of the time that guarantees the specific case in the stimulus. Okay. But the approaches for necessary and sufficient assumption questions are very different. Sufficient assumption questions often lend themselves to formal logic diagramming, whereas necessary assumption questions are more informal logic. It's really just seeing what is required by the argument, what is contained within it. A person who believes in the argument is logically committed to believing all underlying necessary assumptions.
Okay, and does it make sense after I read the stimulus in a necessary assumption question to guess what the answer might be, or is that just a waste of time?
If something comes to you, if you naturally surface a prediction, then you could scan for that. But there are often multiple underlying necessary assumptions. And so it may not always match your prediction. And so there's the alternative method of negating all 5 choices. And the correct answer choice, when negated, will destroy the argument because the argument requires that necessary assumption.
Okay. Well, okay, as you can see, I have a lot of questions about this necessary versus sufficient assumption questions because this is the most challenging topic I have encountered so far. And right now, I'm wondering, am I focusing too much on this? Because for example, I didn't even start reading comp yet. And I have only gotten so far in logical reasoning. So my idea is that I should master the basis of necessary versus sufficient, and I should master conditional logic before I go on with the other topics. Is that a right way to approach it, or am I just making things harder for myself?
Well, when are you taking the LSAT?
I'm thinking in June.
So you have a lot of time.
Yeah.
In that case, I wouldn't be too worried about moving on right now. I would say slow down, take the time to understand this thoroughly before moving on, or at least give yourself a few weeks on it because you have that time.
Yeah. And also I'm considering, I'm studying with the trainer, and I'm also thinking of supplementing it with some online courses. I was looking at your courses, but I'm not sure how both the trainer and a extra online course would work, or what should I do right now? What kind of courses should I take? I don't know. Do you have any recommendations on
Sure.
that?
So, I mean, any general LSAT textbook, especially a good one like what you're using, it would certainly be compatible with my courses. I mean, we're all talking about the same exact exam, and maybe terminology will differ slightly, but it's pretty easy to figure out just by looking at the questions which question type one is talking about at a particular given point in time. And so you have a book, that's great. The video courses include on-demand video lessons as well as live online master classes and Q&As with me, along with group coaching. So there's the chance to attend class with me, get your questions answered live, and also access the entire archive of previous class recordings and foundational course video lessons. And I'll also give you a study plan to show you how best to use all the course material along with the actual LSAT prep tests. And it's pretty easy to make some modifications to include the use of a book as well. And the general principle is, and this goes to your question of study schedules, how to structure your studying, is basically read the relevant textbook chapter, watch the relevant course video lesson, then complete several practice problems of that question type. Then do the same with the next question type category and repeat for the various types of logic games, ordering, grouping, combinations, and miscellaneous, and then all the various logical reasoning question types and so on.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, and so far I've only been studying with the book, and I've been doing the drills that the book assigns. And for example, I'm trying to review the questions that I do, the drills that I do. I'm also I'm wondering how much should I review there? I know I read a bunch of tips on how to review. I'm talking especially with logical reasoning questions. And like, for example, I have an Excel sheet of like all the questions that I have trouble with, and I write down the conclusion, I write down the support, and then I write down what I think the argument is. And then if I'm still having trouble, I look up like some answer explanations online that I found free. Yeah, and it takes a lot of time. And I'm wondering, like, with the level of knowledge that I have or the lack of knowledge that I have, like, is this reasonable? I'm not sure.
It honestly sounds like you're doing all the right things. You're reviewing the basics, building that foundation, doing practice problems and reviewing, and you're allowing time too. You're allowing several months until you take the LSAT. And so I think you can afford to take it slow and steady to really build that baseline of knowledge, to gain that ability of pattern recognition, to see a new problem and relate it back to one you've done previously, and slowly increase your understanding over the course of the next several months. So it sounds like you're doing all the right things. And this is a very difficult exam, and so it takes time, but it sounds like you're putting in what's necessary.
Okay, I'm very relieved to hear that because I'm really stressing out, trying to juggle a full-time job and this. And actually, I'm not even taking any days off. I feel like I need to study every day to catch up. But now, like you said, you're right. I have a lot of time ahead of me. But with the, my job is quite demanding also. So sometimes I have to work until late hours, and that day, like, I just cannot study at all. Or sometimes it's really hard for me to fit in LSAT studying into my work schedule. And like, I've listened to your podcast about, like, you were saying like you could study in the morning or like at night, like before coming home, and all of that makes a lot of sense. And I try to apply those like every once in a while, but like when I can't, I get really stressed out. Like I miss this, and then I have my schedules, and I cannot comply with all that, when I miss out on work. So all that really stresses me out.
I hear you. No, but it's important to take days off, especially when you're studying over a period of several months, as you are. And at least with my study plans, I include days off. But even if you fell behind for some reason, the schedule is more important for the level of specificity it contains about what to do than the particular day-by-day breakdown. And so if you missed a day, you could slowly play catch up on that day over the course of the next few days. Don't try to do it all the following day. You don't need to do 2 days worth of work in one day, but gradually over the course of the week, if you did a little bit more than what each day had allotted, you could eventually catch up. Or you could also modify and do fewer problems of a given question type, and then maybe catch up on that later if you feel that you need to.
Yeah, so I need to be flexible and like try to figure it out with my schedule. Okay, I get that. Okay, I could ask you about like, I think I've developed a strategy for reviewing logical reasoning. I haven't really built that foundation of reviewing with logic games. How do you recommend that I review logic games?
Well, first off, I would say redoing games is enormously valuable because you can see new ways to attack it, new ways to approach it, new ways to diagram it potentially, or to use previous work. A lot of times games will have a certain efficiency about them where you can use a previous hypothetical scenario that you've drawn to help you solve another question in that set. But it's not always apparent, especially when you're just going through question after question after question. And so consider different methods of approach. Maybe do the local if questions before the global general questions and see if that previous work helps you. Or if you look at a video explanation online and you see how someone does it, like I have most of the games on video on YouTube, explanations for all of them. And so you can look at how I approach it, how I might have done multiple main diagrams to break the game wide open. And maybe you did it a different way, but benefiting from someone else's approach could give you more tools in your toolkit when you're approaching new games. So redoing the same games several times and seeing different methods.
Okay. I'm going to just glance through my notes. I'm sorry to see if I have
Take a look.
other questions. Okay. So I'm probably going to take one of your online courses. I'm going to look up, I think you have 3 different ones, right? I'm not sure if your courses include the answer explanations, do they?
They have some explanations in there, but they don't have all 8,000 plus questions explained or anything like that. But one nice thing about the courses is the live classes you can attend and ask your questions directly there.
Yeah, those, they're going to be really hard for me because of the time difference, unfortunately.
I understand. Well, you can always also submit your questions in advance over email, and then I'll do my best to cover them in class. But it's not really about explaining individual practice problems. It's really more about the bigger mindset and conceptual things related to building a strong foundation. But you can also watch all the archive of previous class recordings, and there are many explanations within the course as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to look through my notes again. Okay, books. I have, as I said, I have the trainer, and then I have two practice exam books. I'm thinking of buying another one for the drills, but maybe I need one more since I have so much time and I could probably use more full practice tests. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that especially if you have several months till you take it, it's certainly worth investing in another book of exams. Over the course of several months, you could do the most recent half of exams. You could do everything from this millennium. You could do everything from exam 29 up to present day in the 80s, or you could do everything from 52 to present. You could certainly do that. So I'd say get the most recent 3 or 4 books of 10 exams at a minimum, and consider adding on more. I mean, they're $20, $25 each. It's a no-brainer to get them if they could help you even just a little bit.
Yeah, 3 or 4. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And also, I read an article of yours. You were comparing what was it called? Was it called Super Prep and one more book from LSAC with like extra explanations?
Right.
Do you recommend those?
Yeah, so LSAC, the Law School Admission Council, they don't explain most of their exams, but there are a couple of books where they do have their written explanations. The Super Prep is one of those. So the Super Prep 1 book contains 3 older exams, February 96, February 99, and February 2000. So 3 exams along with explanations for every single problem. Then there is Super Prep 2 that contains a couple of recent exams along with their explanations. And so if you're only going to get one of the 2, get the newer one, but that will also have some overlap with one of the books of 10. It's a little complicated, but bottom line is that if you want the LSAC written explanations, the place to get them is the Super Prep book. And yeah, I'd recommend it. I think that it's useful to see how LSAC approaches the questions, how they think about them, not so much for the logic games because their diagramming techniques aren't really the best, but for the logical reasoning and reading comprehension, they have a very technical way of explaining things. And it's a good insight into how they think about it. So I'd recommend it for that reason alone.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And also, I'm considering buying one of your suggestions, the rulebook for arguments, for like to read on my way to work and stuff, like for reading in my free time. I think you were recommending that and one more. Which one do you think I should get, like to get an insight into flaws?
I would start with a rulebook for arguments. It's really short. It's a little over 100 pages, and it's kind of like the Elements of Style by Strunk and White, but for logic. So Elements of Style is a classic handbook on grammar and diction, I believe, on writing, on rules of good writing. And a rulebook for arguments is like the equivalent, but for logic. So it really boils things down to their essence in giving it to you bite-sized different methods of reasoning and then different flawed methods of reasoning as well. This is not an LSAT specific book, but at something like 120 pages, you really can't go wrong. It's a quick, simple read, but there's a lot packed in there. And I tend to like things that are concise and boil it down as opposed to some of those LSAT textbooks that are hundreds of pages, which have their value, but with limited time, they might not be as practical.
And I think it might be good to like get an insights and like see more examples of flaws, so it's easier to spot them on the exam as well.
Yeah, exactly.
It looks like this is all. I was really worried about like how to schedule my studying, but you made it sound really simple. So I'm relieved, and I'm gonna check your study schedules and check your courses definitely. And I hope to see you again there.
Same. Before we sign off, what would you say is the biggest insight you got from our call today?
The biggest insight I got, it has to do with the scheduling and with and hearing that like my reviewing, it sounds good and it's what I should be doing, and so it tells me that I'm gonna be doing the same. And also, yeah, that I could be flexible with the scheduling as well.
Awesome. Great. Well, please keep in touch, and I hope to see you in the course soon.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much for this and everything you're doing, by the way.
My pleasure. Well, have a great weekend, and we'll be in touch. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.